Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to let you know a little bit about what we have been thinking in Germany on a possibility to make the German and the European power system 100% renewable by 2050, and the role that we, as the German Council for the Environment, actually see for Norwegian hydro. Norwegian hydro comes into play, as you've seen in the previous presentation, as a very important resource. The German Council actually is quite independent of the government. It exists since 1973, and it's appointed every 4 years for a 4-year period. And a good council is a council which will not be appointed by the government again, because it comes up with the truth and with good advice, which sometimes is not all that easy for governments to handle. But that's our task, and our task is not just to inform policymakers, but to inform the general public just as well. Now, 2008, the Council was confronted with a discussion in Germany where people were discussing and policymakers were discussing, shall we actually build additional new coal-fired power plants, or shall we extend the lifetime of nuclear power plants until we reach the bright future of renewables? The Council said, well, this is the wrong discussion. Let's discuss when we can actually achieve 100% renewables and how do we get there. And for that purpose, the Council actually commissioned the calculation of 8 different scenarios, which fall into 2 broad categories. One, you can say, is the energy efficiency family, where we foresee that as compared to a present electricity consumption of approximately 550 terawatt hours in Germany, if we use all the efficiency potentials, we can reduce that quite substantially and include individual mobility, electrical cars, and additional electricity uses in industry, and we're still within a framework of about 500 terawatt hours per year electricity consumption in Germany. If you're not efficient, you need to count on about 200 terawatt hours more, so there is another family of scenarios that we have had calculated on 700 terawatt hours. And the biggest hurdle to such a 100% renewable system would be if you restrict everything entirely to Germany. So you clip all the wires, no connections to the outside, and you say, okay, you have to produce 100% of the electricity and 100% of the storage that is necessary to supply Germany at every hour and every second of the year with the necessary electricity, all in Germany. This is not realistic, but we showed you can even do this. Then we said, well, this is not quite realistic. Let's look a little bit abroad. And let's look north, because there is the biggest resource that we are lacking, which is storage. In Germany, we have a good resource for the production of renewable electricity, but we have a lousy possibility to store this. So we look north, and then, of course, you'll find Norway, and we said, let's connect 3 countries, Norway, Denmark in between, and Germany, and let's see how such a system functions as a 100% renewable system for all the countries involved. And then we said, okay, in a last go, we look at Europe till the Russian border and North Africa, the 5 countries in North Africa adjoining the Mediterranean. All these 36 countries, can we manage in such a big system, 100% renewable? So that is the area that we looked at with the big systems. Kind of more or less in the middle you see Germany, and north of that, pretty much still in the middle of the picture, Denmark and Norway. If you look at the potential, which is the first question, do we have enough energy to actually tap and supply all this renewable electricity? And this is just a picture for the entire area. You find that in the entire system, you would need something like 5,000 terawatt hours by 2050. And what you could produce easily inside these borders would be about 100,000 terawatt hours. So about 20 times the electricity that we need, we could produce after we deducted all the competing uses, all the other things where we don't want to go, where we don't want to produce anything from renewables. So the energy is there, the potential is there, but how does it look if you look at the hourly simulation? So how do you supply your electricity every hour of the year? The black curve that you see is the German load curve. So every hour it changes, and you have to supply this load. That's what people are asking for. Maybe a steel plant, maybe a little lamp in your bedroom. Now, beneath this curve, there should not be any white spot. Now, if you want to do this, and this is a picture where we clipped all the wires from Germany, everything needs to be supplied inside Germany, you find, yes, it is possible, but you find a lot of red underneath the zero line. All this here, the dark red, that is production that cannot be used because you have to build such a big system due to a lack of storage. Now, for a maximum capacity of 81 gigawatts on the day of the year where you have the highest load, you will need to build 260 gigawatts of capacity in solar and wind and biomass to meet this demand because we are short of storage. And the overproduction is about 1/10 of the total demand, about 50 terawatt hours. Now, if you introduce Norway into this system, with its hydro storage potential, you find strikingly hardly any red left here. Only a few hours of the year when it will not pay to build just for a few hours power lines, you have overproduction. The system is balanced, and actually you can reduce the capacity of installed electricity generation, renewable electricity generation in Germany down to 160 terawatt hours from 260. So such a system can actually level quite easily if you can use the Norwegian hydro storage potential. Now, why do we think the Norwegian hydro storage potential is such a unique animal in the world? One, it is a very large system. It has a total capacity of about 84,000 gigawatt hours, 84 terawatt hours, and it has a unique structure. Normally, if you look at a hydro reservoir, it's a single reservoir. If the water goes through the turbine, the water goes down the drain and it's gone. In Norway, this is different. The water comes from an upper lake, goes in the middle lake, and then afterwards goes into the lower lake, and afterwards goes into the fjord. Now, this is a beautiful system if you think about storage and pump storage, because once the water has left the upper reservoir, because you need it to produce electricity, wind comes along, solar comes along, and gives you excess electricity to pump the water back up the hill. And the water was still there. It's in the middle reservoir or in the lower reservoir. So that's quite unique. And the system is huge. This is better known to you than to me, the system of Siracuina. This hydro system has a storage capacity of 5,600 gigawatt hours, which compares to just 40 gigawatt hours in all the pump storage installations that we have in Germany. So we have little puddles and you have big lakes, and that is a very big difference. Now, if I'm not all mistaken, if you look at Siracuina, there are possibilities to increase the production and the storage capacity just by additional connections between the lakes up to 10 gigawatt in capacity. That is approximately 9 nuclear power plants that you don't need, because you can actually substitute these plants by wind and solar in Germany, plus some backing by pumping in just one of your hydro systems. Now, this is a bit complicated graph. What it shows to you is what happens in the Norwegian hydro system. If you go to Nord Pool, their homepage, you can find the levels in the reservoirs in Norway in terawatt hours. How much water do we still have in there? And this is a typical curve across the year. The black line here actually was the filling level of the Norwegian reservoirs in 2008. This corridor here is actually the historic low and the historic high of the level in the reservoirs. So it shows you a clear seasonality. The Norwegian system has been designed to accumulate water when the snow melts. Right here. It fills up, it takes it through the summer, and when the frost comes in, and the water is not coming down as rain anymore, but as snow, and it stays on the mountains, you have to make it through to the next May till you have the melt period again. So the level drops, here the melting starts, and off you go again for refilling the reservoir. So you have a seasonal storage system which takes the summer from the water from the spring and the summer into the winter. In Germany and most of Europe, we have a wind regime where we have little wind during the summer, and we have lots of wind during the fall and the winter. So if you apply the scenario that I just showed you with the Norwegian pumping, if you apply this, then you have the green line as opposed to the black line. This is what would change. And what you find is actually you start filling the reservoirs earlier, before the melting period starts. You take some water out of the reservoirs when they're the fullest during the summer, and you refill them in fall. And you end up at a higher level than you actually started, which may be a very interesting aspect for Norway. And we looked at this with a more recent study where we actually modeled all the Norwegian reservoirs, not just as a big reservoir as one, as in the big study before, but we actually modeled the details. And I will show you in a second how that impacts on the filling level in the reservoirs. But first, a big discussion is how much in power line connections do you actually need in between Norway, Germany, and here in this case Denmark. And the connection in 2050 for a 100% renewable electricity system would be about 42 gigawatts. That's a very big number, but it is not undoable if you compare that to other endeavors. Now, how does this develop along the development pathway of building up renewables? Here you see what is overproduced in the German system just based on the renewables as we build them up to make it to 2050 100%. And the surplus, this lower curve actually shows you the surplus where we go over the maximum still with the capacity that we're producing. So this is sheer overproduction right here in the case of high load in the system, and this is the overproduction in the case of low load in the system. Anywhere within this corridor is the excess electricity that we're producing in every year in gigawatt terms. So 2022 I actually put in here, we calculated that a little later. But this is the way it will develop up to the 42 gigawatts if you want to go that way. Now this is the most recent figure that I brought to you. We just calculated that last week with the new NEMO model, and it actually shows you what happens to the levels in the reservoirs in Norway if you introduce additional power lines and pumping into the system. And the lowest curve actually is a bit above the curve where you have no connections. We didn't calculate no connections, so it's not in here. But take this one, where you just have 1.4 gigawatt connections as the lowest. If you increase the connection capacity, what do you see? You lift up the level in the reservoirs when it's critical. You lift it up here, where you have the lowest filling level. You go higher in the early summer. You reach the normal level during the summer. And at the end of the year, if you like, you can actually end up with a higher level in the reservoir than you started out with, which may be a very interesting feature if you look at the last few years of rainfall and precipitation in Norway, where you have the situation that the levels of the reservoirs are dropping year after year after year. You're not able to totally refill. Here you could refill with cheap wind and solar electricity that you get when we are overproducing. Now, one of the big questions, of course, is, isn't this bad for Norway? Because electricity, once we couple the markets, will become more expensive in Norway, because in Germany, at the moment, electricity is more expensive than in Norway. If you look forward, 50%, around 50% renewables electricity production in Germany. This is the ordered price curve across the year. So it actually is ordered by the price level, and you find in very few quarters in the year a very high level of the price, and in some hours of the year, low levels of the price. The dashed blue line is the price in Norway without a connection. The dashed red line is the price in Germany without a connection. And if you introduce additional cable capacity, 8,400 megawatts, or 8.4 gigawatts in this case, you find that most of the time there is a substantial reduction of the electricity price in Norway, because in Germany we're overproducing wind and solar, and the price at the market tends to be very close to zero. So one of the big advantages that we would get from the connection is lower electricity prices, which comes mostly as a surprise to people who are not familiar with such calculations. We looked at the entire Europe plus North Africa, what comes out in electricity prices once we are at 100% renewable for the entire area by 2050. And you find there are some states which have relatively low electricity costs. Those are heavy wind driven, and somewhere in here, there is no way in 2050 an average price below 5 cents per kilowatt hours, or for the insiders, 50 euros per megawatt hour. For 2050, that is a very reasonable price. Germany right next to that, if we're able to link up. So we can make for relatively low costs and prices in 2050, although we have solved 1/3 of the climate problem and the nuclear damage problems. My conclusions, what do I take from this? What would I like to underline? We looked at the situation, we can say 100% renewable electricity supply for Germany and for Europe is possible by 2050. I didn't talk about this, but if you're in a hurry, you can even make it by 2030. I could show that later on. This pathway to 100% renewables can solve the problems of climate change and nuclear energy in the power sector at the same time. You get rid of them once and for all. I'm quite convinced that all other environmental impacts can be held to a minimum if you do this in a decent way. Look at the details, look at each and every reservoir, look at the limitations, don't overdo what you're doing in a single reservoir, and you still can make it. The system, the supply will be mainly based on wind and some solar, but in the northwestern corner of Europe, it's mostly wind energy. Pump storage and transmission will be absolutely crucial. If we don't for pump storage, we need to go for other storage, which is far less efficient and far more costly. Pump storage can also help keep Norway's reservoirs full. And with the exchange, with the power lines connecting at least Germany and Norway, or Europe and Norway, power prices in Norway will be lower as if you would go for splendid isolation, which you of course can. So the bottom line is Norway can help to green Europe and be better off. Thank you very much.